Welcome to Inside Photo Organizing, from DIY to Pro, with Allison Friedman from Arrange Wander Focus of Chicago, Illinois. And I am Susan Wallach from Save a Memory of Northern Colorado. Together, we will provide photo organizing tips and tricks for everyone from the person who wants to do it yourself to other pros in our industry. We'll discuss current software and hardware news about photo and digital asset management. We will be answering your questions, and we hope that as you learn more, you can complete your own photo organizing project and feel more confident to finally know, hey, I can find that special photo that I've been looking for. Good morning, Allison. How are you today?
Good morning, Susan. I am great. How are you?
I'm awesome. We're actually recording this later than we normally do, so I am with it today. Usually,
That's true. Yeah, so our viewers or listeners may not know this, but we usually record at, 9 in the morning?
9 a.m. Mountain. Yeah.
Mountain time. I am a super duper early morning person. I am up and out of the house by 5 a.m. literally every single day. And let's just say Susan is not.
Yes.
So if she's a little cheerier today, it's because we are recording at, noon.
11 Mountain.
11 Mountain, because our guest is from the West Coast and did not want to, do this at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that is why Susan is all chipper. I'm actually a little tired. I've had a full second weekend of graduation parties for my kid who graduated high school.
Yay!
Yes, it's very exciting, but he likes to get out and socialize. And there just seemed to my older kid graduated high school during COVID, so there were no parties. So I feel like my younger one is making up for it.
Good for him.
That's what we've been doing. Yeah.
Living the life. Good.
Living the life. Yes.
How
so
exciting.
I'm super excited to have today's guest, Haleh Shoa. Her company is Picturli. She's out of California. We've both known Haleh for a little while now, but we were all together at Roots Tech, and that was the first time I had actually heard her story and realized that Haleh, among other talents, is also an excellent storyteller. So that comes out in her work. It comes out, you'll hear it today. And so Susan and I thought it'd be super fun to have her on and talk a bit about storytelling and culling and curating photos.
Which she loves to do on her clients' stuff, I hear. She attacks them. So, yeah, we have a lot of different topics and subject matter that we like to talk about, and this one, I am really excited to hear some tips and tricks that Haleh is going to share with us today. So, are you ready? Let's get started.
Hello, ladies.
Hello, Haleh.
Good morning, Haleh. Well, I should say good afternoon, because it is afternoon here and I'm not used to doing that. So good afternoon. Welcome from California. And tell us a little about yourself.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I have been so excited to join this podcast with you ladies, because I've been enjoying it since first episode. I love all the guests that you bring on, so I'm excited to be a part of the repertoire. Thank you. I decided to become an organizer sort of by chance. I studied with a life coach in 2015 who basically was helping me figure out what I love doing, which really was to do photo books. And doing photo books and calendars for my family and friends required a lot of curation and culling. So you can't do a photo book unless you know what you want to include, and you have to go through a year's worth of stuff, either yours or a client's, in order to pick out the best stuff. So I was already kind of doing that. And when I started the business, I realized that a lot of people don't have their items either scanned and archived or organized, right? So all the digital assets were all over the map, Shutterfly, Dropbox, and all that. So that's really so I started to learn really quickly that this is actually the base need of what most people want, is to get their items organized and curated and archived, or organized for the digital stuff. So, but the heart of my business comes from my personal experience of being in Iran. I was about 8 or 9 years old when the revolution broke out in Iran, the 1979 revolution. And I remember my parents packing a suitcase of our items, which was mostly our photographs. And my mother, there was no way, all the banks were closed. There were sanctions and things like that. So all the banks were closed. And I remember my mother was sewing in stacks of $100 bills just to be able to bring some money out of the country into the same suitcases that carried the memories. So we are very grateful that those suitcases never got lost, because more importantly was the memories that they held. So we came to the United States, and about 15, 16 years later, I was working in advertising, and I found myself really wanting to start scanning those old photographs and start talking to my parents and the elders in the family and my older cousins about who these people were, what their stories were, which is the heart of my business, right? So the first bit is the technical side, and every single photo organizer has a heart story that has pulled them into doing what we're doing, because we're dealing with families, we're dealing with memories, and we're dealing with items that are irreplaceable.
When you told us part of that story when we interviewed you briefly at Roots Tech too, I was just blown away. And so, the ability to pack up, and again, it's often the photos that are the first thing besides your family and your pets that you grab as you're leaving in a very short amount of time. So what you're telling me is like right on target, along with, what most people do in those kind of situations. And so many then just keep those photos, and they don't often go to the next level, which is now what you're dedicated to doing for not only yourself, your family, and your clients. So what's one of the first steps you do when you get a new client and they want to, have you curate everything? Do you ask them? Because some people may not want that.
We absolutely ask them. The first thing we do is really learn what the client's goals are and their attachment to their memories. I found people who have lost a parent within the first year if they want to start the project. If they start it within the first year or year and a half, they're still really attached to all the memories. So we have to navigate that, compassionately, and to let them know that perhaps they may not want all the pictures of when they were little, they went to the zoo and they have all the pictures of all the animals from the zoo. Or perhaps they went to Hawaii and they took a lot of pictures of the sky and the ocean and, things like that. They may not necessarily want to keep those types of photos and scan them. They can keep everything, but they may not want to scan those. So
there's an interesting thing about that. I was thinking about exactly this the other day, because I have a client who sent me a whole ton of negatives, and she took the time to go through and say, these are the ones that I want. And, she cut out a lot of the ones I think there was a trip to the zoo in there, and she cut out a lot of the animals. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking, why do we take those photos in the first place? So literally anybody that goes to the zoo right now, especially with kids, will take pictures of both themselves or their kids at the zoo and the animals at the zoo. But 20 years from now, nobody wants those pictures of the animals at the zoo. But I think what's interesting is you want them in the immediate time, because you may want to share it. You're going to say, hey, mom, guess what? We went to the zoo and look, there's a lion cub. Whereas right now, that's kind of important. 20 years from now, it's not that important. So I actually find the curating is different depending on how far in time you are from the events in the photographs. right?
Definitely.
Let me just add this one point though, because I'm in the process of preparing for a trip to Wyoming to see the Grand Tetons in Yellowstone. So, there are people, not me. I am not a professional photographer at that level where I would go and take a picture of Grizzly 399 and then, put it on my website and sell, large photos. Although if I capture something awesome, I probably would put it on my Smug Mug account. But, when you talk about zoo pictures and wildlife, yeah, oftentimes those are, some of the easy, low hanging fruit, you might say, to remove from someone's, scanning job. Anything else that comes to mind?
Personally, I recommend keeping photos. If anyone's in them, we just keep the photos because those naturally lend themselves to keeping the family story and the family history, right? So if your father went to Africa in the 60s and he took a bunch of photos, many of them fuzzy, of all the animals, but he's in it, we want to keep that photo of him in it, right?
Right.
And even if today we go to the zoo and we take a photo of our kid against, the little lion cub, I would keep that photo.
Right.
But yeah, so to answer your question, we definitely get a sense of what the client wants to keep. And so I typically recommend, especially if you get a really, really large collection, for the client to allow us to keep 10 to 20%. But when I say that, a lot of people, feel really uncomfortable with that, right?
I would.
Well, the key is we're not talking about keeping exactly. We're talking about digitizing.
That's
because
correct.
yeah,
That
it's a
is
difference
correct.
between actually getting rid of those
Right.
old albums. Actually, I want to take a little segue for just a sec. I'm curious, in the albums and photos that your mom was able to save,
Mhm.
is that mostly people, or are there also things like, the equivalent of the zoo or whatever?
Landscapes
I'm
and
just curious. Yeah,
All
I'm
people.
curious what's in there. All
It's all
people.
people, yeah. There wasn't much. I was the third child. I only had one album, I think.
I bet the
Uh,
first two had more than one. Just saying.
Indeed. Yes, they did. Yeah, because my older brother was the eldest, and then my sister came and she was the first girl. And then I think my little sister actually had quite a bit because there was more photography when she was born in
Right.
1975. And then there was a huge lull in photographs. Obviously, the country was on fire and we had to get out, including, get out with our photos. But yeah, there wasn't a lot. So there wasn't, a lot. I think maybe 7 albums in total.
So, this conversation is making me offer a suggestion to our listeners that, when you do take pictures of that sign at the zoo, put your kids in front of it. Or, you're taking pictures of the elephant, in their big area at the zoo, have your family in front. That's what that, analogy made me think of, is if you're going to take the photo with an animal behind it, take it with your family, but don't put your kids too close to wild animals.
But going back to what you said too, you said one of your first steps is to really get to know the client, right?
Yes,
Because they'll have
absolutely.
different, if somebody looks at my collection, they're going to see like 100,000 photos of birds. And I would not be happy if somebody went and deleted them. But once you got to know me, you would be able to suggest, hey, Allison, you don't need to keep all 100,000, but why don't we keep the best ones of each
Variety.
species,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah, but getting to know the client is, I think, like you said, probably the first step.
Definitely. That's
Yeah.
the first step. And we always make a family tree. So we actually try to gather that before we meet. If there's a strong interest in really getting it, some clients are just kind of sussing out whether they want to do this or not. But some clients are like, when can you start? So we know that they're very interested in moving forward to archive it, whether with us or not. So, but we know that there's a strong interest. So we always start with the family tree, and this way we can understand, when we're looking at a photo and the mom looks like she is perhaps in her 50s or 60s, we can kind of guesstimate what decade that might be in. And the reason we do this is because we, probably as you as well, we organize everything chronologically before we archive. And we want to make sure all the digital assets come out nicely in terms of chronology as well. So we know a lot of metadata can get stripped when things are downloaded from the iCloud or what, just through time, from different types of handlings. So we want to make
or
sure
sharings, like sharing through
like
email
WhatsApp.
or WhatsApp or chat, depending on
That's
how you
right.
share, it gets stripped. Yep.
That's right. Or Facebook, when you download from
Oh,
Facebook.
that's notorious. Yeah.
Yeah. So, obviously, as we know, a lot of people have actually their best of photos in Facebook. I have had several clients who used Facebook as their photo hub, which makes me so sad. So they would put it on Facebook and then they would delete it. But
Oh
so
my gosh.
if anyone's listening to this, please don't do that anymore.
Let's say that louder for the people in the back. Please don't make Facebook or other social media your photo hub. Variety of reasons for that. They strip all the metadata, they compress your photos, they can do whatever. There's long reasons for that, which I think we've all
You don't
talked
save
about
the
different times.
originals. Yeah.
And you don't own it. More
You don't own it.
importantly, it's your photo and now someone else owns it.
So yeah, sorry, go
Go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to get back a little bit to the storytelling because curating is really about storytelling. So when people decide to make an album, so when we were all younger, or our parents or their parents or whatever, they would take a roll of film, they would get 36 or 24 photos back, they would pull out the ones they liked the best, and they'd put them into an album. And just the act of choosing which photos to keep and what order to put them in the album, even if they don't add any additional writing to the pages, which a lot of people do, a lot of people don't, it's creating a story. What is, so is that what you're thinking of when you are helping a client curate their collection? Is it the same type of brain process you're following? Because digital is quite different.
Yeah, in terms of analog, meaning anything that's tangible. So negatives, slides, photos, anything in albums, right? Those are all what we call analog. Obviously, some of those that I just mentioned are easier to see, such as the photographs or anything in albums. Others, the transmissive stuff is a bit harder to curate. So in terms of the analog, we basically take anything that's not blurry, so we could see it, right? So you could go through a stack and say if we have many clients who still have their photos in envelopes. So we can take a look at what's in an envelope and just choose like the 4 best of that's in that envelope. And the envelope hopefully will have a date. So we can sort of say, okay, we think this was their summer vacation in 1992. So that's easier to be able to suss out. But in terms of digital, it's basically sort of the same, right? So you're seeing what they have taken, and we either start at the beginning of a series. I don't know, for some reason, everyone wants to take a minimum 10 photos of someone standing there, smiling already, eyes open, and, nicely posed, and they keep clicking. Like, when you go to a restaurant, you're like, can you take a photo of our group, please? And the waiter just keeps like pushing that button. And I just drives me crazy. I'm like, all we need is like 2.
They're all literally the exact same, except when kids are involved. When there's little kids, because they're wiggling around and whatever. But yes, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
And usually the first one's the best one. The first one and the second one. Yes.
And with children is the opposite. It's the last one. It's when you start yelling at them. So in terms of telling the story, though, you just have to start with the best of, and then the story arrives essentially when you are seeing the collection that's cleaned up, So you're not muddling through all the Amazon return QR codes and the receipts of restaurants and the multiple pictures that the waiter took and all of that. So once you have a really clean collection, then the story will arrive. Then you can go, what did I do in January of 2023? Oh, this is cool. Like, okay, let's include these 10 photos and so on and so forth, right? So it really starts with going through and just choosing your favorites. And of course, we can talk a little bit about the strategies that I give my clients with their digital stuff.
You mean moving forward in maintenance? What do you mean? Can you?
Yeah, in
explain
terms
that?
of, I'm sure you guys have either do this yourselves or have implemented this. Personally, I go through and delete my photos. And, if I go to someone's birthday party, I'm pretty excited to look at all the photos. Or when I go to a concert, I still take some videos. And then I go, why did I take so many videos? But I go through and delete them, delete the ones that are just too long or whatever. So I'm pretty good at curating right away. But I tell my clients, like a lot of our clients who have kids, they don't have the brain power, a time span to do that. But if they just can carve out a little bit of time and just heart the photos that they like, at least those best of will end up in their favorites at the very minimum.
It'll just naturally float to the top when you do that.
That's right. That's right.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
I do think sometimes it's easier. I actually tend to do the same. I usually clean things out fairly quickly right away, but there are certain categories of things that I do find are easier to clean out later. If you wait a little bit, you probably will end up deleting more.
Travel.
Travel is a huge one.
Travel is a huge one. We went to Mexico City and Cuba in 2015. And then when we got back, I had my camera with me, and then he had his cell phone. I had my mobile, which I lost in Cuba. So thank God I didn't lose the photos, because I had ended up in an area that had Wi-Fi, which is really rare in Cuba. And it had all uploaded to the cloud. So I have the
thank
photos.
Goodness.
Yeah. But but it's so hard. It's so hard to curate those photos, because I'm like, I like that church photo. I like this church photo. Oh no, 2 years later, I'm like, church photo. I don't need it.
Yeah, I find people photos you can clean out very quickly, very easily. You're literally just looking, is everybody smiling, or is this their best look, or are they funny? But I absolutely agree with you with travel photos. And I keep, you've seen some of mine. I keep too many, but I also love nature photos in general. I actually, when we travel, take more photos of nature than I do of people. I'm like, oh, you want to be in it? Well, okay, fine. I'll take one of you. But I really enjoy that. That's me. So I have both, but it's hard. But when you look back later, it is easier to get rid of. I don't need 15 photos of that church. I think one was probably enough. Mm-hmm. The lighting is about the same.
But interestingly enough, when I'm doing a photo album, it is the church photo or the nature photo that becomes the largest on the page. And it becomes sort of the background of the people photo.
Yep.
So don't get rid of all of the landscapes and the church photos.
Yeah. But you don't need. So I used to work at the Grand Canyon, and I would see people there. They'd get to one stop and they would take like a gazillion photos of the exact same thing. And later on, last year, I actually had a client who had been to the Grand Canyon. We were making a book of the travels of the Southwest. And she had done that. And she had like 50 photos from Desert View, which is where I worked, which is a pretty small area. So you don't need 50. I had to look at them all, and we got it down to about 2. They all literally look the same. But, there's this fear of not getting the right photo, I think. And it's just easier sometimes to click away than to actually stop and think, what am I taking a photo of? Is this something I actually want? And what's the best place for me to take it from? But you can see that then when you're curating. It's just creating more work for you later, I guess.
Yeah. There are 3 things that I tell all my clients. If your main source of photography is your phone, make sure the lens on your phone, whether you're taking a photo of someone or a selfie, that those are lenses and they're dirty because our hands are all over them. They could be against our face when we're talking to someone. So first step is make sure those lenses are clean. And then you can go into your settings, and there are a couple of settings that you can turn on that are automatically turned off. One is to turn on grid. That shows you where sort of how
Level.
Another one is level. So there's one is grid and the other one's level. Turn those on, and it will really help you take better photos.
Totally agree.
I don't know if you guys are like me, but when I take a photo, they're all crooked. Level has become my best friend.
Level is great. Yeah, level is great. And
I naturally take things. I try to position visually in my when I'm taking a photo using my mobile phone. Just go for the horizon. I'm always looking at the horizon. I don't know, that's just natural. So grid is helpful if you want to position something in thirds. If you have that kind of an eye and you're looking at, you want to put your subject matter off center, then grid is really good for that. Any other great
I'm still
tips?
Crooked though when I'm doing that. I have to say, it doesn't matter. I do the
post
same.
editing.
I think it's the camera. I think it's our camera as well. I don't think that, anytime I take a photo with a bunch of people, invariably the person on the very left and right, their faces are a little warped. Yes, it's awesome to be able to take a photo at any point in time quickly, but it's not the best camera.
Yeah. Well, the warping happens if you go down to the lowest magnification, where you're like, 0.5 instead of 1.0 in your zoom. So if you don't use the what's the reverse of zoom out, then probably you would not see that warping.
So getting back to the curating a little bit, what is your ultimate goal when you're curating clients' collection, or what are some of the different goals? Because I think a lot of people just think, oh, I need somebody to help me with my photos, but they don't know what that means. So you have to dig a little bit. What does that really mean? So what are some common goals that you see?
We go through, if it's analog, we go through several albums, to figure out, okay, who is this person? How old is this person in this photo, right? Because chronology matters. And then I sort of start talking to the client about what I would keep on that page and why, and then see what they come back with. If they are horrified at what I'm saying, that means they're less, I mark that as curate less, because it's just they're very attached to all of the photos on the page and of the stories. If they are saying like, oh my God, good, yeah, I don't want to keep that either, for whatever reason, whatever reasons were that I chose to not include that for scanning, right? So it's something that I just go through with clients, and I explain my approach, and that's the approach that I have taught all my employees. I have 3 employees who are curating a lot of the main collections. So I sort of go through the same thing with them, and I say, this is what I discussed with the client, and here's what they've approved. Here's why they did not approve us taking this out from scanning. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it does for me. I've had a client when I was going through and doing the initial, I call it my inventory, and we were looking at photos. The zoo photos were some of them, no people in them, lots of photos of animals. Some wildlife excursions where they went, to a national park, and so you have some landscape photos, no people in them. And then there was some weddings. And I said, do you remember, who these people are? Because they were much older than my client at the time. And they're like, yeah, I think that's like a second cousin something. And just keep a couple. Like, I don't even know who the people are in the rest of them. Now, it's not that we got rid of the prints. They went into the archival quality box, along with everything else, but they were in a section that I indicated that were not scanned.
That's right.
Is that how you do it as well when you package things
That's
up?
right. We call it rebatching. So if we are working on a batch, let's say Christmas of 1992, and we're keeping 10 and we're not keeping 30, for example,
Exactly.
we do have a system of bringing that together when we're boxing. I do ask my clients if they want the not scanned in archival box. Archival boxes are expensive, and the boxing of is also very time consuming, so that can also become expensive. So some of my clients choose to get them back in non-archival boxes, so then they can go through them, and they can choose to just buy extra boxes if they want to keep some of them.
Yeah. I
That's
usually
actually
put them in. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say that's an interesting point. I don't think people generally realize how much time it actually takes just to box things up properly. So,
it can take up to a week, literally a week. We had a collection of 125,000
Oh, Lord.
items.
Wow.
Yep. Yes. Yep.
and why is that? Just so people know, tell us why. Why does it take so long to box them up? Because you think, oh, well, all I have to do is line them up and stick them in the box. How hard is that? So tell us why it's a little harder than that.
We use a sort of a library batch card system where we have, Allison, maybe you can explain the batch card system better than me, but essentially there's a batch card, let's say 001, and it has a date. So we keep everything when we scan in the chronology of the batch card, so that when we are done, we can then make, and we put everything in a Google sheet. So the date and the event goes in one column and the batch card goes in the other column. So we can sort it either by batch card or by date. And when we sort it by date, then that tells us what the batch card of that very first thing that goes in the box is, right? So it could be batch card 656 out of 1,000 batch cards. So
because we don't always scan an order, right? I don't know if either of you two do that, but I very rarely, I don't always scan in chronological order. It depends on how it comes.
We never.
It depends on how it comes. Yeah. But even for me, when I get things physically organized, this could be, anything from prints to negatives or to slides. You think the date, and you put it into a batch, and then you scan it and you realize, oh yeah, that she couldn't be in that year because she's so much younger. That's like 20 years before the date I thought.
That's right.
So then that batch number the batch number stays, at least this is how I do it when I'm in Lightroom. I batch everything by the batch number and by a date, as well as any other, event information, Christmas, bar mitzvah, any kind of special note that will help me clue in what was happening in that grouping. That will stay with the metadata, so that later on, as Haleh uses a Google Sheet, I use Lightroom to sort based on those batch numbers or based on date, because eventually those images get moved to different dated folders. What makes it harder for me then is to get those slides or the prints that I guessed wrong that are now digitized, and then put them correctly in that box later on. That's that organizing time that you speak of, that can, because if things are out of order now, right? You thought one thing and then you realized during the process, oh yeah, this person's, like 20 years younger than the date I thought. So instead of 1970, she should be in, or 1980, she should be in 1960. Then you're physically having to move it in the box that is the final destination for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We make sure that we get the dates before we start scanning. So we make sure that we look at that. I mean, we can't do that with negatives. And, we give
Well, unless
ourselves
they come out
grace.
of an envelope, though, that's dated.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah. So perfection is the enemy of progress. And,
I think I have a T-shirt, but I'm not wearing one that says that.
yeah. I used to be super, super detailed, and then and then I would take a look and I go, wow, we just spent 80 hours trying to get these 1Z, 2Z photos out of that batch and put them in the right year. And in all good conscience, I could not charge the client 80 hours that I boxed her stuff. So there's no way. Like, so now I tell the client, you're going to have some photos that end up in the boxes that might not be in the right batches, because we caught them digitally and we put them in the right batches digitally. So you may not be able to find, and they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And it's much better for them to save $5,000, of us trying to find these onesie twosies than. So we sort of have to advocate in terms of advocate for the project in a way, right? To not be super perfect about the minutia details. But it does take a long time to box, because if you have, let's say, 6 bins that you've scanned, which is 6,000 photos, depending on how many batches you have to go and find that batch number in that box and then put it in the front. And then you have to go to the next batch number, so on and so forth. And then you have to create labels for those batches. We used to create a label for each batch before, but now we really keep it just to the year. We explain it to our clients. Do you want a label for each? Like, you could have just 2 photos in a batch. Do you want a label for just 2 photos? Or can I just say 1981? And most of the time they're fine with that.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to, if they wanted to find a physical image, I would ask them to search then, because I give them a list of the keywords I used. So they'll get that text file with all the keywords that the images have been tagged with. And then, so if they're looking for the physical print, they can search for the image digitally, figure out what the keywords are, what the year was that I physically organized them. And that's how they can get to that year of where that physical print could be, or that neg.
The other thing that I found takes longer than it should, and maybe this is just me, but I have this slight obsession with using as few boxes as possible, like getting them into the smallest packaging, which is easy if your whole collection is 4x6s. But nobody's collection is 4x6s only. So then you're dealing with, you've got, for 1986, you've got 100 4x6s, you've got 3 8x10s, you have, which can't go in the same, size box. It doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of, for me anyway, there's also a lot of mumbo jumbo, moving things around and trying to figure out the best way to get the different sizes in the right place and all that. So people don't realize that there are so many different levels to something as seemingly simple as taking everything after you've scanned it and sticking it in a box and handing it back. But that's why they look so pretty when they're done, is because we do take the time to do it right.
That's right. We had a client who said, oh, because I explained to her, this is how long it's will most likely take if we put them in the boxes. And she's like, oh, well, I could just do it myself. And I was like, great. So, and then just in preparing to give that to her, right? Because I had to prepare the batch sheet, and then I had to explain it to her. And then I had to give her where all the boxes were, or like all the photos were. Just that was 10 hours alone, right? It just takes a long time.
Yeah, it does. Let's move back to the storytelling and curating. How do you ensure that the most important memories are kept, or that they are kept together? And that they're not lost, because sometimes it's easy to tell. There's a wedding, there's going to be a fair number of photos. You can tell that's a big deal. But what about that, random photo of great grandpa on a farm? There's 2 photos maybe of that, and it turns out that is one of the most important things to that client. How do you get to that? How do you figure that part out?
That's an excellent question. We tend to really keep most photos 1970 and prior. We just keep all of that, you know. It's really the 1980s and 90s is when we get photo clutter, which is on par with our digital clutter that we have right now. In 80s and 90s, film was rampant. Everybody had a local, even like my father owned a dry cleaner, and he had a photo processing machine in the dry cleaners. So like
One-stop shopping.
That's right. There was a photo processing like everywhere. Like liquor stores had photo processing, and it was, you know, buy one, get one free. That's when
and
the
cameras were coming down in price too.
Cameras were coming down in price. Film was cheap.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, so people took a lot of photos that were kind of whatever, you know.
Right.
But in the 70s, it was more intentional. And then in the 60s, you know, it's just so great. Those photos are so phenomenal. And then anything from the 70s before, unless it was just really blurry, then we just don't, you know, we don't include that. Again, we don't include it for scanning. We don't throw anything away. But we just had a Japanese family who had items from sort of the turn of the century until now. And this is a kind of a really interesting story because I don't know about you guys, but we get a lot of yearbooks, and we got a yearbook from 1944, 45, and 46. I'd never seen a yearbook from the 40s. Most of the yearbooks that I've seen the earliest were in the mid to late 50s. And so we're looking through these yearbooks, and, you know, because usually with yearbooks, we scan the cover of the yearbook, and then we scan any pages that family member could be in. And we're looking through, and it was like all the kids were Japanese, and we're wondering like, what's going on here? As it turns out, the mom was in an internment camp in California. And so all the kids were Japanese and all the teachers were Caucasian. And I just had chills because this girl went 2 years in internment camp, and then she went to essentially a normal high school in 1946 when they were all released. And you know, all the letters to her were like, you know, Mickey, you know, we love you, you know, have fun at the next high school. You could still like feel the joy of a teenager in them. So I mean, these things tell stories, right? So one could say, oh, it's just a yearbook. But it's like, you know, we go through the yearbook and we read some of the letters and we see the significance of just the 3 years of her teenage life. Like that is so important to be able to see because there's no other photos. I don't know if they were able to take any photos in internment camp. We couldn't really find that many photos of her as a teenager. In fact, there was not that many of her in the book either, but it was her memory that we were able to memorialize for the family.
You just really don't know what a person's life is going to display in those physical albums and prints that they bring to you. And, you know, back to the point of, you know, prior, you know, from the 70s, you know, earlier, you know, maybe late 1890s, I get stuff all the way up into the 70s. And it's a handful. Like the early 1900s, you're lucky if you have 10, you know, for every decade. And then by the time you get into the 30s, and it depends again, financially, how wealthy the family was and could afford, but you might have 100 photos for the 20s or the 30s, you know, and then even into the 50s, you know, I see some people give me, you know, their collection, and I'm lucky to see maybe 200 at that point. They were people would bring out the camera for very special occasions.
It was intentional.
Right. And we've sort of lost that because we walk around with a camera and we take pictures of our shopping lists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'm guilty of that. I send the picture of the shopping list to the kid while he's out saying, can you pick this up? But going back to that yearbook, it made me think, and one of the other questions that we had for you is about sometimes the photos that we want to keep aren't the best ones, but they are important for some kind of background. And your discussion of the yearbook made me think yearbooks often have pages in them about what is happening in the world at the time. I just looked at my son's. Like I said, he just graduated from high school. We just got his yearbook, and the last few pages are what was happening in the year, the school year 2023 to 24. I'm wondering, in that particular yearbook, were there other photos that would have been worth keeping that she might not have been in, but because they give some background as to what she was actually going through at the time? And then a more general question is, how do you identify those photos that are sort of required to help people remember what was going on, but they're not necessarily falling into the other category of the person or the pet? Does that make sense?
So to answer your first question with the yearbook, yeah, we did scan photo pages that did not include her photo in them, just to be able to. And, I actually texted the client and said, you must go through these 3 yearbooks because there's so much history in this, even though if you don't know anyone. So and that's the other thing. Like, we actually really find things and highlight what they should look at after we're done with organizing their collection, even if it's something that we're not even going to scan. But a lot of times we call the client and say, you really need to go through this. I don't think it's worthy of scanning, but it's really interesting for you to keep it. And then of course we can scan it if you want. But we're not going to scan every single photo or every single page of a yearbook, right? But it is really worth it for them to go through that. And then remind me of your second question.
Well, the second question was related to the first question, in that we often, we take photos of other things that might not to somebody else appear to be important, but they are sort of required for the story. So since I talked about the Grand Canyon before, I'll just say, when I worked there, I lived in this little trailer, this horrible little trailer that had mice. And I lived with these 2 guys who were more the security. I was the park ranger. They were security. And I remember taking photos. These photos are lost, but I do remember taking photos of things in the kitchen. And one of them was often be like a stack of plates in the sink. And this is back when I did not have a digital camera. This was a film camera. And I still took the photo because it was something that annoyed me to no end, literally on a daily basis. And I wanted to remember that. And I have to say, if I actually had those photos now, I don't know where they are, but if I had them now, I would probably keep one of those photos of the dirty dishes. But literally nobody else would ever have any sense of why I would want to do that.
You're setting the stage for that memory. You're
exactly.
setting the environment, what was happening. I love to look back at photos of homes or apartments or condos where I used to live that I didn't intentionally take, that I took because, we were standing in front of the Christmas tree and I had wished I had just gone around that apartment and took pictures of my life where I lived at that point.
Right. But my question for Haleh is, we know from our own photos, we can identify those photos as important. So, but as a photo organizer, how do you recognize those photos? And this goes right to the heart of when people ask, how can you possibly curate somebody else's collection?
Mm-hmm. So I start most conversation, if it's appropriate, by telling my client or clients that we curate through the lens of what their great grandkids would want to keep.
Oh, that's a good point.
And that immediately sets the tone of, yes, that's good. Or, no, this is for me. And so if it's for them, then it would be something that we would keep, right? I don't know if I would keep a photo of dirty dishes. I think that goes into the pile of 1982. You look through it and let me know if you want me to scan that for your collection. But Susan mentioned pictures of houses. We do typically keep photos of houses because there's an intention for taking a photo of a house. And I personally love photos with cars in them. So if you look at photos with cars from the 80s and back, I just love it. I love looking at a photo with vintage cars that are vintage now.
Yes.
So even if no one's in them, I tell my staff to keep the photos of the cars because it's just such a timestamp.
Yeah.
And
I love
you know
those.
what I mean? It's just
Oh, yeah.
like certain things we always keep because it's a timestamp of the era.
Yep.
So it's not just about a person being in a photo or a beautiful scenic shot, but
And if the client can't tell me what kind of vehicle that is, I'll do a reverse Google search on that image and then add that, like it's a, I've got one, I'm doing a project where I'm scanning 900 slides, and they always stood in front of their new vehicles, and there were several new vehicles during that
That's
period
cute.
of time. And one of them was the old Gremlin. Do you remember
That's
those old
cute.
Gremlins? So I got to figure out what make and model or what year that Gremlin
Okay,
image is
so
from.
here's the question. Why? Like, okay, if the client doesn't care, I absolutely, I keep the photos of the cars too, because they are part of life. Lots of things happen in your car, right? So take
Well,
that
because
as you, but why? Like, I literally care nothing about cars. So I would keep it because it's the client, it's part of their life. But why would you go through the extra effort if the client didn't ask you to do it in the first place of trying to figure out what the car is? Who cares?
it's fun, and they included it in their notes to me.
Oh, well, that's
Well, but
different.
that's different because they clearly care.
Yeah,
They
that's
wrote
different.
down
Right,
their
so they
family's
care.
Gremlin.
So
Right,
that
but
makes
they didn't-
sense.
They didn't write down the year. So that is like the extra. That's why my service is a white glove service. No, I'm
I
just
suppose.
kidding.
No. You left that part out of the story because the way you said it made it sound like you on your own were just wanting to go through and figure out what these old cars were, which to me says that's the why. Obviously, if the client tells you, I had this great whatever year Gremlin,
No, but I'm going
then
to give
that's
another.
telling you it's something that's important to them. So you go ahead and do it.
Yeah, but
I
I'm
can
going to
say this
say
right now.
another
I care
reason.
nothing about cars.
It helps me date them too.
Right.
So there's the old Studebakers from the 20s and the 30s or whatever. I can narrow down when they may have taken that photo if
Right,
there's
but
no
that's
other
different
record.
than what you said. See, I'm going to call you out on what you said because you didn't initially say this had anything to do with the client. You made it sound like this is an interest of yours, in which case I'm just
It is
saying
an interest of
I
mine.
have zero interest in cars. I use them only for dating purposes, but I would, unless the client gave me some reason. But anyway, we're getting kind of far afield, and this time it's my fault. Not always my fault. This time it was. Anyway, but yeah, actually that does leave a good point, is I know Haleh knows this too. When you're trying to dating is kind of the bane of my existence, is trying to date photos, but cars are super helpful.
Yes.
Sometimes landscapes, actually, depending on what is in or is not in them. Clothing is another one that can be super helpful.
Hairstyle.
Hairstyle is a really good one. I find myself Googling hairstyles a lot, actually, to try and figure that out.
I mean, in terms of curation and chronology, I've started to give our clients a choice. Do you want us to get super specific, meaning figure really like, so we always start by putting things in decades if they're loose, right? If they're in an album, we can typically tell that this album is from this particular date range, year, or date range. But if it's loose, we always put it in what we think is the decade, and then we can go one step further and say early, mid, late, and then we can take that one step further and say, is it 60, 61, 62? So we give them a choice. I didn't used to give them a choice. I used to just do the super detailed, but again, they may not want that. They may just want early 60s, and or just even 60s. Some people are like, I don't care. And then I would call them and say, you have about 2,000 photos in 60s. That's a lot. That's a lot of photos to have just in one batch.
In one decade.
In one decade, right? So then I explained I explained to them that it would be good if we did break this up. Like, just even for your own digestion, it would be easier to look through them and be able to enjoy them. So
yeah, I do that the same way. start with decades. And then for my own stuff, I'm very particular. I want to have the exact, as close as I can get date. But I do find that clients a lot of times, especially when they bring you their parent stuff, the older photos, they don't necessarily care, is this 1961 or is this 1962?
That's
So
right.
it is, yeah. That also can be very time consuming, because when we're talking about Googling to find the year of a car, or the year of a hairstyle or whatever, that's actually quite time consuming when you have if you have 100,000 photos in your library and half of them, you need to figure out what the dates are.
It's just too much. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
my
And
clients
most people
are
don't
fine.
care.
They don't.
Yeah.
They just want to be. I mean, the thing is, scanning is just one part of what we all do. What we do that's really invaluable to our clients is we make sense of those scans. Making sense means we try to give it a name that's searchable, and we try to give it a date that would be sortable. So, and just that first level alone, just even for us to say that this was 1960 and just date it 1960, is invaluable to them. Because if they were to put this in a box and send it away to one of those services that just scans something and gives you a thumb drive, what they get back is img234.jpg. They're not going to get something that's renamed and redated, right? That's the value that we bring to our clients. So again, it just even that first level of organization is invaluable to our clients.
Totally.
A lot of time that clients can take that too. So yes, getting it back 100,000 photos just named 1 through 100,000 is not helpful. And literally just adding the date and a decent name. Because I found some clients that's enough. Because once you have a date and a name and you can kind of see things in context, they don't need to do much more. Sometimes they want to do more.
Well, yeah. And if they're in a platform that allows them the ability to rename and redate the batches more correctly, for example, Mylio, or for example, Forever. Smug Mug, yes, but not really. But it's you're enabling the client to then take that collection and go through that, which is great. Some of my clients love that.
Right. So that brings me to the question about what tools and software you use to do the jobs, that your clients bring you. What are your go-to tools?
How much time do you have?
Give us your top 3.
Good Lord.
We all use like a million tools. So yeah, just give us your top ones that you use most often, or your favorite ones that might be esoteric, but they do something
None of them
that nothing
are my
else
favorite. Does. Let's just say that. Not a single one is my favorite.
Understood.
And we're not going to talk about why they're not my favorite. A Lightroom is
that could be a whole different podcast.
Yeah, maybe that's another podcast. Yeah.
Yes. Lightroom and all its accoutrements, all the plugins. Lightroom is good, but it's nothing without its plugins.
Right. Totally agree.
I think we need to have a podcast about all the Lightroom plugins and what they do. That would be valuable.
We should actually.
Or a blog or something. Can someone please do that? I will pay for it.
A podcast on that would be super, super techie, but that would be really fun to do.
It would be.
I'm going to write that one down. I already have some people now that I think about it that could do that with us. So
yes.
Good one. Okay.
So Cheryl is the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's a few. Yeah.
So the Lightroom, so basically we use a program to organize that, where we could see the dates and the metadata and the file type. So that is typically Lightroom for us, even though I hate the fact that I have to wait for it to sort of catalog everything. I don't like that about it. So the second thing is a program that takes out the duplicates for the digital. And so right now it's Photo Sweeper, but we just bought a PC and I'm about to buy a second one so we can test out. Help me out.
Duplicate Cleaner Pro.
They're pro.
Thank you. Duplicate Cleaner.
Duplicate Cleaner Pro is way more powerful than Photo Sweeper, but it's harder to use. Anyway, PC only. But yeah.
I need to give you a third one. So geez, there's so many. Oh, ABFR, we use that quite a bit.
A better finder,
Finder,
rename. I had to think
Yeah.
about that. Yeah. Okay.
ABFR, better finder renamer.
That's a
whatever.
huge part of our workflow. Mhm.
So you rename in that instead of Lightroom, just out of curiosity?
We do rename in that.
Okay.
Yeah, our workflow is to batch everything by the batch number. And because we have the sheet, there's a whole back end system to say, find this batch number from the CSV file and rename it this. So it just does everything, and then it renames all the photos in that folder.
Interesting.
It's
I do all
much-
that in Lightroom. I'm a very visual person, so I do it by folder. Once I've got the images into a dated folder, then I rename the images by a certain date parameter with a unique sequence number. And I do all that in Lightroom.
We don't manually do anything anymore because it's not cost effective. Because we charge per scan and we include certain things in that scan charge. So renaming and redating is part of that. And we have to we automate that.
Cool.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I've used both. Kind of depends on what the thing looks like anyway. But yeah. Okay. Do you have any quick tips for people who want to curate and cull their own collections? We've talked about a few, but maybe you can just kind of bring it back.
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, it's much harder to curate something that just happened. So one of the tricks is to choose today's date or a date in general and go through your camera roll of that date in different years. So it's less overwhelming. Another trick is for recent things that you've taken, let's say you went to a birthday party last night, go through and heart those, so at least you have those, like your favorites in a favorites folder. And these are all digital, right? These tips that I'm giving you is all on your phone kind of tips. I think those two things are really great. And then if we want to look under the hood, at least on an iPhone, there's and on Android, actually, Google Photos are also, and Amazon Photos also give you these, where the platform organizes your stuff by file type.
Yeah.
By file type. So you can have screenshots, you could have selfies, you could have all the different types of movies that you can take, slow-mo or all the bursts, a lot of things
panoramic.
A lot of things that are taken unintentionally, or a lot of things that are taken intentionally, but you don't need them. I had a client who did have over 3,000 screenshots, and she wanted all of them because they were all sort of inspirational and aspirational quotes. So we had to sort of put all those together. I teach my clients also on how they can clean up their camera roll, especially on an iPhone, where they can put certain items in a shared folder that's shared with themselves, and then they can take them out of their library. For example, those inspirational, aspirational quotes, they don't need to be in with her sort of family photos. They can live on a shared album that's shared with herself, where she has access to it, she can share it. So just little, depends on who the client is, what their needs are. There's different strategies that I teach and I explain.
And when you share it, just as a reminder to our listeners, to a shared library, it's a lesser quality, isn't it, than the original when it goes out there?
Yes, but
yeah,
it doesn't.
Well, let's be a little careful about terminology. It's a shared album you're talking about, not the shared library, because the shared library is very different.
Is different. Yeah.
Shared album.
So it's the shared album.
Yeah.
It's the shared album, correct. And usually the things that we do take out, quote unquote, out of the main feed, things that we explain to the client that you could put this in a shared album to yourself and take it out of your library, are things that are not family photos. I work with a lot of home organizers, and they go to a client's home and they have to take photos of what they see. That doesn't need to be next to the photos of their kids' soccer game. They can put that in a shared album and take it out of their feed. Or real estate agents. So they take a lot of photos of the house that when they're doing a walkthrough. So they're just typically things that don't need to be in your feed are not family photos, right? So it doesn't matter if those are lesser quality.
Yes.
There's a lot of
We're never going to
examples
make an
of those.
album.
Right. Your recipes I actually see the inspirational quotes a lot. Things like recipes also, or screenshots of books you want to read, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that terminology so thank you for correcting me on that, because shared libraries, shared album, they all have different features and functionality.
That's right.
And we make mistakes like that all the time too. I just think it's important when we recognize them to go ahead and correct it. Okay, so we are just about out of time. So everybody knows what I'm going to ask now, because I ask it every single time. And I'm very curious to hear your answer, I have to say. So Haleh, what is the strangest photo in your collection?
So I do this really funky thing, especially when we're on a hike. Do you guys know like a panoramic shot, right? You start from the left and you pan to the right.
Yeah.
So I've done several of these, and they're really fun. They're really funny, where sort of I start, like, let's say Alan, my husband, he'll be on the left and I start panning the shot. And when he's out of the shot, I tell him to go behind me, around, and to the right. And so he's very crisply, nicely in the same shot twice in a row, doing different poses.
That's fantastic.
I love doing it. In fact, I used to have one of those when I first built my website. That was the banner on one of my pages, was my kid in his bright orange raincoat doing that. I love those photos.
So yeah, I just recently was like, hey, we can do that. And so those are, I don't know if it's funky. Is that what you said? What's the funkiest thing in my photo?
What's the strangest photo in your collection? Which everybody interprets however they want. It's really just pick a photo you'd like to talk about and tell us about it.
So I think it
tells us about you.
It is strange because, I include those photos on our calendars, and my mom always goes, how did you do that? Is this photoshopped? And it's like, no, you just pano.
It's actually one of the coolest things you can do that's not Photoshop, I think.
That's right.
Like, it's a really cool, unique, and people have fun doing it too. My kids loved, not so much anymore, they loved doing that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay.
Well, this has been amazing. I just enjoy our conversations, and today was wonderful, and I've learned some cool tips from you. So I thank you. And yeah, this is awesome.
Always. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, and we will have all of your information on our website and our resources page. So if anybody listening would like to connect with Haleh and her company, I don't even know if you ever said the name of your company. So let's make sure we get that in there. Did you? Because I don't.
You mentioned it. It's Picturli, and I do have a 7-step guide to organizing your photos for anyone who's listening, who's a DIYer. You can sign up on my website. It's picturli.com/podcast, and then you just put in your information, and you get the 7-step guide.
Excellent.
Awesome.
And we'll be sure to have that link in our resources page too, so that that'll go right to her website.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. We love these conversations, and we hope our listeners do too. So if you have any questions for us, or maybe even for Haleh, let us know.
Yeah, I offer complimentary consults, so feel free to book one with me.
And you are in, what part of California are you in? I mean, not that that matters. I know you do remote as well, but what part of California are you in?
Sunny LA, baby. Although it hasn't been sunny at all lately.
No. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun talking to you ladies.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, Allison, another wonderful episode interviewing Haleh. I find her so uniquely interesting, just how she approaches different things. And, again, everybody's got their little, superpower. And when I heard her love of, guiding her client projects through the culling process, I just knew, we had to talk to her about it.
Yeah, she has many superpowers, actually. She's very, very interesting. And hopefully we'll have her back another time to talk about some other things as well. But yeah, I do love her approach is a little bit different. I think all of us have slightly different approaches. For people out there who are listening and thinking about doing it themselves, I think listening to these different approaches is helpful. Or if you're looking for somebody to help you, it's really important to find somebody whose approach matches yours. And so she gave us another one and had some great tips. And I love that I learned today how much you love cars, and you've learned that I really don't. I just don't care about them. Although I absolutely agree with the dating part of it. They are very helpful for that. But
well, the fact that you search Google for hairstyles, I was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
I've thought of clothes, but I hadn't thought of hairstyles. So
you can reverse search a photo and try and figure out what the hairstyle is. And that's just one that I think is sort of a last resort because it's time consuming and tedious. And I don't care about hairstyles either. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Have you ever had the ladies with the beehives and you're like, oh my God, that's classic.
Yep. Well, they help. They help trying to figure it out. I think people don't realize that when you are a photo organizer, you are also a sleuth and a detective, because to do it right, to put things where they need to be, that's all the stuff that we look at.
And there was a set of images that I was just looking at the other day, and she went from long hair to pixie, the pixie cut. And I was like, oh, I remember that. I mean, that was like a fad because of an ice skater, I thought.
I think so. I don't remember who it was though, but yeah. And then, there's a Dorothy Hamill cut, but I don't think that's the same one, the bowl cut. But that's actually also how I go through and figure out how to batch some things, try and put photos together. Well, the hair was very long at this point.
Exactly.
So even if I don't know the date right away, I know the photos go together, or it was very short, or it was red or brown. Or I actually love women who change their hairstyle frequently because it makes putting their photos together a lot easier. Mine would be very hard because my hair kind of stays the same. But anyway, another fun episode. As mentioned already, all the resources and how to connect with Haleh and how to download her 7 tips to curating your photos. I'm sure I have the name wrong. But that will be a link on our page so that you can go ahead and find that and download and continue to send us your questions. I think we're going to answer some on our next podcast because we've got some building up now. So we're going to do them together on our next podcast. And if you have questions, please send them to us. We'd love to answer them.
All right. That's a wrap. Thanks, Allison. Take care.
All right. Have a good day, Susan. Yep. Till next time.
That's it for our show today. Remember, you can find this episode on all of your favorite podcast apps. Be sure to click follow so you can stay up to date with the latest in photo organizing. We'll catch you next month.